Hey, hey, Smokestack Lightning, Howlin' Wolf, Smokestack Lightning. I remember listening to that song when I was 14 in 8th grade over at my buddy Smitty's house.
God, that's quite a memory.
It was one of the first, tunes I remember from out of the Chicago blues scene.
Really?
Smokestack Lightning, Howlin' Wolf.
So sweet.
Okay, well, we got a guy here who actually requested that song, and his name is John Russick. And John is, I'm not sure what your official title is, but you are at the Chicago History Museum, and you're here to talk about the museum and a couple of exhibits that you have going on. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
What is your official capacity over there at that beautiful museum?
My official capacity, I am the Vice President for Interpretation and Education, which basically translates into the sort of public...
the public guy.
Exhibitions, public programs, curatorial, the collections we bring in, that sort of...
Well, if I walk in beside where the Gas for Less sign is in that beautiful old car,
Yeah.
which way do I go to find you when you're there?
I'm everywhere.
All right.
In that experience.
We like
right?
a guy who's everywhere.
You know, the exhibits, the programs, sort of the way we talk about history, the way we share the collection, it's a collective responsibility, of course. There are a lot of people making these things happen, and certainly that's the case with the exhibits we're going to talk about.
How long have you been there, and where were you before you came to the Chicago?
Yeah, where do you come from?
We'll get to the museum. It just depends on
We'd
how
like
long
to know
your
where you
answer
were
is.
born, where you grew up, where you went to high school.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Stop
you
it.
guys want to know. I've been working in museums all of my professional life. So I worked at the Field Museum for a few years at the beginning of my career. I worked at the National Museum of American History, at the Smithsonian for a few years. Then I was in Washington, D.C. right before I came to Chicago in the late 90s, and I've been here ever since at the Chicago History Museum. Even before it was the Chicago History Museum, back when it was the Chicago Historical Society.
I love that place. I mean, I taught urban studies in Chicago, and we had a lot of students who went through as interns there when Studs was still putting all those tapes and stuff that he has sitting there.
There's nothing like walking through the halls of the museum and running into Studs Terkel to know that you're at the vortex of Chicago history.
Bingo.
Right.
Bingo.
So that was one of the first encounters I had at the museum. I was being shown to where my office was going to be, and I turned a corner and
There's
the red socked man strolling down the hallway.
I love it.
He shook my hand, and I was just like, "Oh, okay, I'm home." This
Michael
is awesome.
just put a picture of Studs, who we interviewed on this show when it was still over at the Heartland, and a nice picture of you and your daughter.
And you in the background making some wild ass move.
I was pointing to take a picture of Casey and Studs. I think I was, but I wish I wasn't in the picture. Anyway.
You look good, Katy.
John Russick, what are the current exhibitions? Part of why we're here today is the incredible array of exhibitions you have, both Amplified, Race, and I think one other. You want to talk about Amplified in honor of Chicago Blues?
Sure. I mean, Chicago Blues Weekend, that just feels like the right exhibit to focus on first anyway. So this has been just a treat of a project to work on. We acquired a really important American musical collection, photography generated by a gentleman by the name of Rayburn Fleurlage, who was in this community a lot in the 1960s, between about 1959 and about 1971. He was
just before Lynn Orman Weiss started taking pictures.
Before I was born.
Community.
No, just
he
kidding.
was really immersed in this community. He knew these musicians. He was very interested in their lives, so he photographed them in their homes, he photographed them in their studio spaces, in their recording spaces, and in their performance spaces. And then on top of it, one of the most appealing things to us was that he photographed the neighborhoods in which these people lived, their clubs were, the whole blues music environment was recorded in photography through this collection. Approximately 45,000 images in this one collection.
How do you pick out?
For an exhibition?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's the challenge. We actually, one of the things that listeners might be interested in is that we digitized the vast majority of this collection, because it makes that process of curation so much more accessible and gives you an opportunity to really do some comparative choice making as you go through the process of like trying to figure out which musicians you're going to focus on, which images really tell the story the best and sort of convey the meaning of the music and the environment. So that's the advantage of that is, of course, then the collection is accessible to everyone, right? I mean, people can access it through our research center or through our digital portals and see some of this material. But that the beginning of the story was actually acquiring the collection and then having what turns out to be just an incredible, almost encyclopedic record of the 1960s music scene. And when we really started to dig into it, we were looking for what that hook was that made Chicago blues in this period really distinct, and that's where the word amplified came from. The title of the show was just this idea that our curator at that time had, which was that Chicago blues was sort of revving up and amplifying its sound to compete with just the noise of the city and to create a unique sound, and that everybody was miking up, and even the harp players were putting a microphone to their instruments, and that this was the beginnings of something that was really unique and special in Chicago.
I'm just thinking as you say that, the Maxwell Street blues players who'd bring their little amp
Exactly.
and plug in and just
They got
rev
bigger
up,
and bigger.
as you said. That's good.
Well, and it's evident in the photography too. That's the beauty of having something like that to document what you're trying to say, is that you're not trying to say something and looking for evidence as much as you're finding the evidence in the imagery and then shaping the story that we tell around that. So,
How's been the foot traffic for
good.
Amplify?
What we tried to do was we recognize that there's a community of people who are just hungry for this collection and this story because they love it, and we don't want to disappoint those people. We want them to come. We want them to see the photography and hear the music that they love. But we also know that we're trying to introduce a lot of people to this sound as we get further and further from the '60s, and the blues in Chicago continues to change. How do we keep people engaged with this sound and knowing what Chicago did in this time period? So, and we also just, we're always interested with young people, getting them engaged with being creative and thinking about how they're going to sort of shape Chicago when their time comes. What are they going to do with their lives? So these stories sort of all come together in this exhibition, which is part story of the Great Migration. It's part story about being creative and making blues music and what makes Chicago blues distinct. And it's also a great document of these musicians and what they did. So it sort of works on all these different levels. It's very interactive. People get to perform music on a guitar. They get to sing.
Way cool.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I'm looking forward to coming over and seeing this exhibit. Usually I show up with my DePaul class and we look at the '68 stuff. But I'm wondering, I'm thinking about a follow-up. I'm wondering about the photographer Mark Pokempner. If you know Mark's great work, of blues. There's probably a few other people, but it seems like you can have an ongoing blues and music exhibit over there.
Mark's work is amazing.
Yeah.
And we've worked with him before. We've got some of his collections.
And our friend Lauren Deutsch and our friend Terry Abramson. All of those photographers. We got a lot of them here. Let me just move us on also to the other exhibit, and I wonder how you figure out the square footage of each of these exhibits, because race, are we so different, ? Which is there until July 15th.
Yes.
I know we covered it a little bit when it was in Skokie a couple of years
At the
ago.
Holocaust Museum, is it the same exhibit?
It actually is sort of the same exhibit.
Okay.
That exhibit that was at the Holocaust Museum was what was a very small version of the full exhibition.
Oh.
5,500 square feet of exhibition about the history of race in America, and we took the full show. Their show was about maybe a quarter of the size.
I should think.
What this exhibition offers is just a really deep dive into not just the science and the sort of anthropological
Race as a made-up construct
about race and where that came from. The idea behind the show really emerged from the American Anthropological Association, which had felt like they had contributed to this idea that race was this really foundational and necessary and important way of thinking about people. And they wanted to undo that. They wanted to say,
good.
you know, whatever contribution we had made to that becoming the way people think about people, we want to say that that's just not accurate. It's not foundational. We've created it, and we've built it into something that it truly isn't.
Can I ask you, John Russick, how do you see folks going through that exhibit? How do you see them grasping or not that concept of race as a social construct? Can you tell?
It's sort of hard to miss. I mean, that is the
main.
Yeah, I mean, if you go through that exhibit and you miss that point, you're not paying a whole lot of attention.
But my question is, can people grasp that?
You know what I think happens in that exhibit? I think your question is it even graspable for those of us who are ready to accept it? Right? Because it is so ingrained in our lives.
Right.
We've been told about race.
How to look at people.
I've been talking about this exhibition that is fundamental messages. There's no such thing as race, and I've been trying not to use the word race.
Yeah.
When I'm talking about it, it's really hard.
Right.
Because the language isn't there to talk about people as one thing. When you start to try and talk about difference, you try to create any sort of sense of like who people are in these different relationships.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to not use the word race.
Yeah.
So that always reminds me just how
Ingrained it is.
Yeah, how ingrained it is, and what a challenge it is even to go through this exhibition and sort of adopt that. But what you do see in the exhibition is story after story in which our willingness to accept race as a tool for dividing people, separating people, categorizing people, has been incredibly destructive. It's been destructive in our relations in amongst ourselves here in Chicago. It has categorized people in ways that has limited their ability to achieve the American dream. And you really, I think to me, the most profound thing is when you hear the young people in the exhibition who were recorded talking about race in their lives and how they think of themselves and how they create relationships with other kids and how race is so interwoven into their lives. That's really where you feel the urgency to do something about it, to sort of start your own process of not thinking the way we've been trained to think, which is that there are these distinct races and they have different qualities and characteristics. And once you see the exhibition, I really think you feel a little bit of an obligation to force yourself to think differently, because it's easy to fall back into those tropes that we've all been trained to think in.
What's the best day at Chicago History Museum for you? What does that look like?
Well, the best days are always when big numbers of people are there. You know, you really feel like the Chicago History Museum, our hope is to be the museum for everybody. You know, everybody in Chicago should feel like this is their museum. The collection is there for them to access and make of whatever they want. It's a welcoming place for any Chicagoan, any age. And so, to me, when the museum's full of people, talking to each other
Funny, that's how we used to say a good day at the Heartland was.
Exactly. It's hard to feel like you're hitting home runs when the galleries aren't full, but when they are, it's got such a great vibe because people really make the museum go. You know, you think about there's this. It's not like a movie theater where you can go and you can be the only person in there and get the same experience. In a museum, you're really relying on this dialogue that gets started between strangers and even in social groups that are coming and they're inspired by these stories and they start to see themselves in this content.
You know, there's certainly a whole lot more that we want to talk about. There's one thing I would mention. There's you have a repeating night that happens at Chicago History Museum called Disruptive Touch. Queer expression in public spaces, June 14th. You don't know about that?
We have an Out in Chicago program.
Yeah, that's it.
That is that we run regularly, and we actually have an event coming up that is on our website, and you can get the information about that. That's happening next week, next Thursday.
June 14th,
Yeah,
right.
and we've got a booth down at the Blues Fest right now, and we also have the History Happy Hour, which we do on Tuesday nights, 4 times a year, which is a big event for us. So
I love that.
If you're interested in coming down to the History Museum, on
History
Tuesday
Happy
night,
Hour.
That's right.
Well, Michael, are you going to take us down another road here?
I could.
No, because we've got a musician waiting.
All right. Do you have any surprise exhibits coming up that we should know about, whether it's this year, next year, stuff you're working on?
He wants to break a story here on Live from
We
the Archive.
have a lot of great projects coming up, and we have a great exhibition on the history of design in Chicago in October. It's really going to be fantastic. If you're a person who likes to look at amazing design, especially objects of design, October 27th, we're going to open a Modern by Design exhibition, which is inspired by the designs that were premiered at the Century of Progress World's Fair in 1933. So a lot of what people think of as Art Deco
Right.
and modern design, streamlined design. It's going to be a pretty awesome show.
Thank you, John Russick of the Chicago History Museum, and for everyone who hasn't been there, go there. It's at Clark and North Avenue, and it's a wonderful place.
It's been there forever, and hopefully will be there forever. John Russick, best of luck to you and yours in continuing great programming. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll probably call on you again if you remain there. Keep doing good things.
Here's some music.